Hi, Kate. Everything okay?
All looks good on my end.
Great. Good. I'll be trying to monitor them as they come in, but we'll have to put the panelists up. And there may be some are there already. Oh, okay. Kate, Kate, can you make me a host, please?
You want me to start? Welcome, everybody, to our second session of the fall series of Israel Dialogues at Holy Blossom Temple. We're delighted that you're all with us, especially in these difficult days and trying times for all of us. We're going to continue our series with a number of upcoming webinars on the issues facing Israel in the current climate, and try to unpack a lot of the issues that many of us are concerned about and thinking about. And we're going to begin today with a very well-known and noted participant in these issues, Alan Baker, who may be known to many of you. He's a friend and colleague. And many of you will remember that Alan was Israel's ambassador to Canada between 2004 and 2008. And prior to that, Alan was very active and very involved as an international lawyer with the Israel Ministry of Foreign Affairs, being the legal advisor there. He actually started his career as a legal officer in the IDF, in the Israel Defense Forces, serving in Gaza. He'll probably have something to say about that when he talks about Gaza in his presentation. And over the years, Alan's been very involved in a number of key subjects and issues that Israel has confronted, including the Oslo Peace Accords, negotiations regarding the setup of the International Criminal Court, and other negotiations with a number of the Arab countries, including Syria. He is currently very involved with the Jerusalem Center for Security and Foreign Affairs. He serves as its director for the Institute for Contemporary Affairs, and he's head of their international law program. And for those of you that are interested in learning more about that and reading more of what Alan's writing about, you can go to the website of the center, jcpa.org, and look up any of the articles that Alan has been writing. He's been very prolific in recent times on covering many of the issues that we are going to talk about today and that we won't even get to today. So there's a lot to discuss. We're very pleased. Alan's with us till 1:30, of course. We will begin with a presentation from Alan, followed by a discussion interaction with our panelists, questions to Alan, and then we will open it up to questions from all of you. So please submit your questions either in the chat or the Q&A, and we'll monitor your questions. And at the right time, I'll bring them forward to Alan. And with that, I want to welcome Alan and thank you once again, Alan, for being with us. And I turn it over to you.
Thank you, Mark. Nice to see you and nice to see everybody or hear everybody participating. I'd like to perhaps summarize very briefly 9 or 10 basic issues, or I call them fronts, that are open and that involve, whether it's from the physical or military point of view, involve Israel, but also from the public point of view, involve Jewish communities, involve international media, and involve all of us in one way or another, especially those who are concerned as to what is going to happen tomorrow or the day after. The first thing I noted was, of course, the situation in Gaza, which was where it all started. Whilst Israel has made considerable military achievements in neutralizing the military capabilities of Hamas, the question still remains that Hamas is holding Israeli hostages, and therefore it makes it somewhat difficult for the Israeli army to go ahead and finalize its military campaign and without endangering these hostages. And nobody really knows whether they're alive. And whilst to a certain extent the Israelis are aware more or less of where they are, they're very careful in taking military action in order not to harm them, especially in view of the fact that we've seen that when Israeli forces have come close to one of the hostages, one of the places where they're being held, so the Hamas people immediately just assassinate them. And so this is a huge problem that is still open, and negotiations have been restored or reopened in Qatar with the CIA and with the Israeli and the Mossad and the Egyptians and others. but there's still no indication that whoever's running Hamas at the moment, and apparently it's a group of terrorist leaders, they've got really no incentive, having lost their leader, Yahya Sinwar. They really got not much incentive to come to some type of an agreement, and so they're holding out, and this is creating a huge pain, a huge amount of pain in Israel between the parents, the families, and the general population. So this is still one of the open fronts that exist, together with the hostages. The other issue, which I've noticed, is the humanitarian supply issue and distribution of humanitarian supply. Everybody knows the fact that a lot of the trucks coming in with humanitarian supply are hijacked, and the materials are sold on the open market by Hamas, who charge huge prices for the various things, and they're therefore denied the population that are in need of humanitarian supply. And Hamas is able to manipulate the international media and the international organizations, and basically point a finger at Israel, as if Israel is preventing this supply, which brings to absurd conclusions by people like the UN Secretary General and the prosecutor of the International Criminal Court, who are accusing Israel of starving, the crime of starvation of the local population. And unfortunately, this connects with my next point, which is the media front, which is totally given to manipulation by Hamas. They accept lock, stock, and barrel the statistics that Hamas put out, despite the fact that these statistics aren't borne out by facts, and every now and then they're changed and altered and minimalized. But the media seems to have more interest in coming down and criticizing Israel rather than pointing to any positive factor. And there are many groups of military experts who pointed to the fact that Israel has perhaps taken more measures than any other army to protect the civilian population from harm, and to move them out of harm's way, in view of the fact that the Hamas have been using hospitals and mosques and schools and private homes for military purposes, which renders all these places legitimate military objectives according to international humanitarian law. And you've got huge areas of destruction of houses that are shown by the international media, as if Israel just woke up in the morning and decided, let's go and bomb this area or that area of Gaza. And nobody stresses the fact that all these areas were legitimate military targets used by Hamas, and Israel went to great pains to move the population into humanitarian areas to prevent them from being harmed. Another front is the sort of backlash of the US election that's going on. A lot of the criticism, or a lot of the discussions range around what is important for this or that US candidate to achieve in order to assuage this or that particular group of potential voters, and this dictates to a certain extent the criticism of Israel or the policies towards Israel, and this, without any doubt, is a major affront. It's a major influence in Israel's situation. The other thing is the UN. Now, I've got much experience in the UN. I worked for 4 years as a UN legal officer in the headquarters in New York, and as a member of the UN Administrative Tribunal. So I'm very familiar with the way that the UN works, and especially UNRWA, the United Nations Relief and Works Organization, which I was, when I was legal advisor of Israel's foreign ministry, I was there, the contact man with the UNRWA legal advisor and the UN legal advisors on all issues involving the status and the privileges and immunities of UNRWA. And what's become obvious is the fact that UNRWA, whilst when it was established in 1948, it might have been based on good intentions, humanitarian aims, but over the years, UNRWA has literally been turned into a front manipulated by Hamas and used by Hamas, and their premises and installations are used by Hamas as storage bases, as headquarters. And Israel has a huge problem with UNRWA. My point that I've been making to the Israeli officials is that UNRWA can't be got rid of. In other words, there are those who were saying, well, we have to get rid of UNRWA, sort of blustering, but there's no way in which the United Nations, after so many years, is going to come along and say, okay, well, let's cancel UNRWA. It just won't happen. So what I propose to the Israeli administration is that if you can't beat them, join them. In other words, Israel should have a very heavy presence within UNRWA, determining or influencing the way monies are being collected, the way they're being dispersed, the school curricula, and the functioning of the organization, as well as their monitoring their staff to make sure that they get rid of all the Hamas operatives that are part and parcel of the organization. The other front is the legal front, the International Court of Justice and the International Criminal Court. The International Court of Justice, as we know, it's a UN organ, 15 judges representing the various regional areas of the UN. The present president of the court is a former Lebanese ambassador to the UN, who's on record as being extremely hostile to Israel, and the fact that he hasn't resigned from, I've forgotten the word in English, resigned whilst dealing with the present issues involving Israel is scandalous. But all in all, the International Court of Justice has lost a lot of its credibility and its dignity as a major international juridical organ. And the same with the International Criminal Court. I was involved in drafting the statute, the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court, together with a lot of Canadian colleagues. And you know, the whole aim of the International Criminal Court, which was dreamt of by a lot of very serious Jewish Israeli international lawyers, to ensure that people who carried out the gravest crimes against humanity, as happened during the Holocaust, wouldn't go scot-free and would be put on trial before a permanent international tribunal. And this, unfortunately, this organization has been taken over by the Palestinians. They turned it into their own backyard tribunal for bashing Israel, and it's caused a lot of damage to the International Criminal Court. And this was complemented even more by the fact that for some strange reason, and I don't know why, the prosecutor, a British barrister who I was always very impressed with as a serious lawyer, for some strange reason, he came out and requested these arrest warrants against Netanyahu and Israel's Minister of Defense, Gallant, accusing Israel of the war crime of starvation of a population, none of which is based on any law or fact. And all this has caused a huge amount of damage to the International Criminal Court. The US is not a party to the statute. The Russians aren't a party to the statute. Chinese aren't a party to the statute. I think the majority of the population of the world isn't covered by the statute of the ICC, but you know, the dreams of those who established it, and I was involved in drafting the statute, the dreams have been dashed by this politicization of this court. And so, in my opinion, it's no longer got much credibility or dignity. Coming to Lebanon, we see that this is drawing to an end. In other words, Israel has achieved most of the aims of removing the capabilities of Hezbollah, the capability of harming Israel and harming Israel's villages and towns. The same as what I said regarding UNRWA applies with respect to UNIFIL. The UNIFIL is the United Nations interim force in Lebanon, despite the fact that it's been proven that they've been accepting bribes and they've been transferring information to Hezbollah and enabling Hezbollah tunnels next to their observation posts. The UN is not going to get rid of UNIFIL. And from what I've seen from the informal draft agreement that seems to be developing, UNIFIL will stay, but it will have a very minor function of helping the Lebanese army and a US-led international group to supervise the removal of all weaponry and all fortifications from the southern part of Lebanon. This seems to be progressing. Nothing formal has been announced yet, but there is this. It's a draft for discussion only. It's called, and I have it, and I can show it to you if you can see it. It says draft, and it's entitled "Announcement of a Cessation of Hostilities and Related Commitments on Enhanced Security Arrangements toward the Implementation of the United Nations Security Council Resolution 1701." A long, complicated way of saying that this is basically going to be a ceasefire agreement and a withdrawal agreement until such time as a more solid agreement will be put in place. And then, of course, the final issue is Iran. And nobody can ignore the fact that Iran has become a very active front. They've now openly attacked Israel, and Israel has responded, and their potential is still very much there. They're still, whilst their proxies have been limited, Hezbollah and Hamas have been their powers have been limited. The Houthis in Yemen and the various Islamic extremists in Iraq are still very active and are still trying to fire missiles at Israel. So Iran is still a very, very serious existential problem for Israel because of the huge amount of weaponry it has and the potential of it becoming nuclearized. So these are the various fronts that we're facing, that Israel is facing, and that you are all facing in having to deal with your own governments and your own communities. So I'll end here, and I'll happily take any questions on any of these issues.
Thank you, Alan, for that overview and analysis. I'm going to open it up to our panel members and for any questions or comments they would like to make in response to what you've provided at this point. So we have with us today Dylan Hanley, David DeWitt, of course, and John Allen. So start with Dylan. Dylan?
Sure. Thanks, Ambassador Baker, for your comments. Very interesting. I just pulling on one of the threads and hoping you might elaborate on it. The idea that Israel should get itself more engaged in UNRWA. Can you just spell out for us what that would look like? I'd never really thought of it as an option in the past. And, you know, it's a hot issue right now in Canadian politics in the aftermath of the decision to ban UNRWA. You know, we have a lot of politicians here criticizing the move. And so I guess as a secondary question, you talk about whether you think there is really an alternative to UNRWA in terms of meeting the needs of the population in Gaza in the short and medium term.
Okay, well, look, I remember when I was ambassador in Canada, I had an extensive dialogue with the Canadian government on the fact that its funding it has always funded quite a large percentage of UNRWA's budget. And I was always instructed by the Israeli government to question the Canadians. If you're going to fund them, then at least insist on some type of accountability as to what's happening with the funds that you're putting in. And never really achieved very much in that field. Look, my theory with respect to UNRWA is a very realistic theory. It's based on the fact that I said that there's no chance that UNRWA is going to disappear. It's a UN organization that's been in existence since 1947, 1948. And as temporarily as it might have been intended, there's nothing more temporary or nothing more permanent than the temporary in UN terms. And in my opinion, nobody as forceful as Israeli politicians might be in saying that UNRWA has committed such grave crimes that we can't allow them to continue, and Israel's got the sovereign prerogative not to allow them to function in Israel, which they did in legislation over the last few days, because we have an agreement from 1967 enabling UNRWA to function in Israel, subject to security consideration. And Israel has now operated those security considerations and has come to say, look, UNRWA has proved itself to be an organization connected with Hamas, connected with terror. Therefore, we don't want them in Israel. We don't want them driving around in Israel. We don't want them possessing property in Israel. Of course, Israel can't stop them from existing in Gaza. And Israel can't do anything about the fact that UNRWA exists as an organization approved annually by the United Nations Security Council. So my own advice has been, and I think that ultimately this is what will probably happen, Israel will be involved in monitoring, whether from within or next to UNRWA, monitoring its staff, monitoring its movements, monitoring its the monies that it collects, and monitoring the monies that it spends, to make sure that it carries out the functions that it was set up to carry out. In other words, to provide education, to provide the humanitarian welfare, and one thing or another, and not serve as a front for terrorists. What was the other question?
Well, it was whether there is and I think you basically answered it, whether there is really an alternative to UNRWA for all of those who say, cancel it and,
UNRWA will have its limited functioning under supervision. But I presume that whatever group of states or organizations or tribes, because Gaza is a tribal society, and Israel is in contact with a lot of the leaders of the tribes. Now that Hamas, the power of Hamas is being reduced, a lot of the local tribes are interested in taking more responsibility in ruling Gaza. So I'm not part of these discussions, so I really don't know what's going on. But I think there will probably be some arrangement whereby, together with UNRWA, there'll be some type of organization established, both together with the tribes and with the Gulf countries and others, to provide the facilities, the education, the health facilities, the other facilities that up to now have been provided by UNRWA.
Thank you. Before I go to John, I had one question for you, Alan. At this point, you, in your presentation, brought forward the draft proposal that's being discussed, negotiated with Hezbollah. And I noted in this morning's...
Not with Hezbollah, it's with Lebanon.
Sorry, with Lebanon, right. But I noticed this morning that that there was some news reports, I think in Times of Israel, that Hezbollah is indicating that they're prepared to move north of the Litani River and create the security zone that Israel's been endeavoring to achieve. And that Hezbollah has also indicated, I don't know if these reports are accurate, that it's prepared to de-link its involvement and its conflict with Israel from that of Gaza. Do you have any comments on that?
Well, yes. Look, this is highly likely that this is the situation.
Hmm.
They've lost a lot of their power and their influence. There are news reports coming out. I heard the news an hour or so ago that various village heads are preventing Hezbollah operatives from getting into their village for fear of the fact that Israel will attack their village or try to assassinate these people. So there's now a very clear move within Lebanon, further north, to act against Hezbollah and to prevent Hezbollah from using any influence that it still has to build up its own power or rebuild its forces. So I think this is highly likely, and I think without any choice, rather than delay things and suffer the possibility of more Israeli attacks against their leaders and against them, well, they're prepared to come along and say, okay, well, that's what Security Council Resolution 1701 determines, that there are no armed elements apart from the Lebanese army south of the Litani River. So be it. And this might well be the outcome. And this is part and parcel of this draft agreement. It's quite long, and it's involved, and they're setting up all these institutions, the monitoring institutions, supervisory institutions. But the bottom line is that south of the Litani, there will be no armed elements apart from the Lebanese army and UNIFIL, which is being given a minor function now. And nobody trusts UNIFIL anymore. And so it will still be there, but it will be monitoring the withdrawal of Hezbollah, monitoring the destruction of fortifications, the removal of weaponry, and monitoring Israel's withdrawal, the withdrawal of Israeli forces from Lebanese territory.
Thank you, Alan. Let me go to John Allen. John?
Thanks very much, Alan. Good to see you again. We knew each other both in Israel and, of course, when you were here as ambassador. I just wanted to follow up briefly on UNRWA. I tend to agree with you. UNRWA won't disappear. It's the main, really, organization delivering humanitarian assistance, health, education, etc. I mean, maybe it would be replaced, but with respect to the Knesset legislation, it seems to me, having declared it a terrorist organization and having said that no Israeli officials can deal with it, is pretty problematic for the organization, because UNRWA people go back and forth in the West Bank, in Gaza. If they can't be talking to Kogat or Israeli officials, I don't understand how they're actually going to be moving back and forth, how they're going to be doing the job that they're supposed to be doing. The other question I have with respect to UNRWA is, and I may be wrong on this, but I understood that the reason that countries like Canada and others renewed their funding was because they were never provided with the evidence that Israel had alleged of these 12 people being members of Hamas. That's what I understood. That evidence was never provided, and they renewed their funding. Maybe you could clarify that.
Well, okay, but the second thing, it's very difficult to contradict footage which shows UNRWA officials raping and carrying out the massacres. It's there. Anybody who cares to watch, and it's pretty nasty stuff to watch the videos. Nobody's trying to hide the fact that these are UNRWA people and these are UNRWA vehicles. And they're being used. So any government choosing not to believe, in my opinion, it's not genuine, and it's part of what's become accepted policy of preferring to accept negative information regarding Israel rather than accepting Israeli justifications or explanations. And this is something that we've got used to over the 76, 77 years of Israel's existence. With respect to UNRWA, look, the recent legislation refers to within Israel's sovereign territory. I'm not particularly familiar with the legislation. I'm also not involved in any of the Israeli politics. I'm completely unidentified. I prefer to remain as an international lawyer, but professionally, without being tainted by politics, Israeli politics on either side. Even my wife doesn't know who I vote for. You know, this law is applicable in Israel. It's not applicable in territories that aren't part of Israeli sovereign territory. And so, in as much as UNRWA staff members and officials are functioning in schools in the Judea and Samaria, I don't think that this will prevent them from functioning. Their headquarters in Jerusalem will be removed because that's considered part of where Israeli law applies. And you know, their facilities within Israeli territory they won't be permitted to use these facilities or to wander or travel around in Israel. But I don't see that preventing them from carrying out their functions in territory which isn't Israeli sovereign territory, and of course in Gaza. And in as much as Israeli officials or Israeli military people will be involved, and I presume they will be still involved in supervising what's going on, what will be going on in Gaza, and especially in the areas closer to Israel's border. So I presume there will be some interaction with UNRWA. But again, I'm not privy to the you know, those who are determining possibilities, policies. So I don't know, but I presume, being practical, this is the only way of interpreting these things.
Yeah, let me just follow up, if I could, Mark, with one more.
Sure.
On the
Go ahead.
ICC, you know, the special prosecutor had asked 6 very well-respected international lawyers to comment on his request. And amongst them was Ted Maron, who was former legal advisor of the ministry a while ago, no doubt, but and 5 others who all supported the request based on the evidence that they had seen. Obviously, they weren't on the ground. So, I mean, I can understand that the Israeli government is going to defend vigorously if it ever happens, or won't defend, will ignore. But you know, to sort of suggest it's you know, fabricated or false, I think there are some at least that suggest that there's some basic evidence supporting the request.
Well, John, well, you know, if we're talking about the basic evidence of the fact that Israel is starving the population of Gaza, this has been completely and utterly refuted, and it doesn't hold water by any criteria. But you know, I smiled a bit when you talked about these 6 prominent international lawyers, including Ted Maron, who's one of my predecessors as the legal advisor of the foreign ministry, and he also served as Israel's ambassador to Geneva until he resigned from the Israeli foreign ministry because he had an argument with them about his second wife not being allowed to have the diplomatic status because she was an interpreter in the United Nations. But without going into that, Ted Maron and the others, and I know most of the others, and I certainly wouldn't call them sort of neutral international lawyers. And this is the part of the problem that exists, and this is why I try and keep away from taking sort of tinging my legal opinions with political background and preconceived political considerations, because some of those people, and I know them, have published many publications, articles, extremely critical of Israel, and not one of them can be considered in any way as a completely impartial international lawyer or international observer. So I don't know what were the criteria of the UN prosecutor, the ICC prosecutor, in choosing these people. But as soon as I saw the list of people and I saw the opinion that they wrote, I just laughed, because it lost all credibility in my eyes. And I know these people, and I know the issues, and I know the ICC, and it's very difficult to pull the wool over my eyes with respect to this. With respect to the substantive accusations, again, I think there's absolutely no basis to them. And that's why I think that the International Criminal Court, the pre-trial body that's considering the request, seems to be taking its time, and in the meantime, one of the judges has been replaced. I don't know, and I don't believe that they'll issue arrest warrants, especially after the fact that Sinwar and all the various other Hamas leaders no longer exist on earth. I think the circumstances are such that the International Criminal Court will probably think twice before going ahead with this. And as I said before, the court is suffering, and it hurts me as somebody who was intimately involved in establishing the court. It's been politicized. It's been utterly politicized, and the present prosecutor and the previous prosecutor have commented on them in various reports that they've issued, and the credibility of a judicial body that claims to be completely impartial, whose judges are bound by very serious provisions in the statute, calling upon them to not to be influenced by any external consideration. I think a lot of damage has been caused by the fact that the Palestinians have been allowed to use the court and do whatever they want there. And they, every 2 or 3 weeks, they bring a group of TV cameras and come to the prosecutor and celebrate the fact that they're issuing a new complaint against Israel for this or that. And I think I'm even one of the potential war criminals that they're complaining against, because I'm a resident of an Israeli settlement. So I tend to minimize the dangers that people might see with respect to these requests by the prosecutor of the court, and I absolutely can't accept the opinion of those 6 or 7 or 8 international lawyers, most of whom I just don't give them 1 ounce of credit.
Thanks very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Alan. David DeWitt.
Thanks, Alan. Let me just make one comment and then a question. The comment goes back to the previous discussion on UNIFIL, the situation there. And just an observation, there was really good scholarship done within the first 10 years of UNIFIL being established, that there was already all kinds of corruption, payback schemes in terms of the troops that fulfilled what was supposed to be the UNIFIL mandate. Now that mandate has evolved, changed. I don't think the difficulties within the UNIFIL command and operations have changed all that much. And since that was so well known, it is puzzling that for so long, the argument had been let UNIFIL play its role, when both those who sponsored UNIFIL and the Israelis who acknowledged UNIFIL knew that it had no capacity to do so in any efficient way. So that's just a comment.
No, look, I can agree with you. You know, I've been again intimately involved with the UNIFIL over many years. In fact, the drafting of the UN Security Council Resolution 1701, I worked with the Foreign Minister Tzipi Livni, who was the Israeli Foreign Minister who negotiated that resolution, and there were very high hopes.
Right.
And why things were allowed to deteriorate the way they did is partly the result of the fact that some of Israel's best friends are the main contributors to and supporters of UNIFIL. And there's nothing much that Israel could have done other than criticize and provide information and say, look, we know that this or that, next to this or that post, there's a Hezbollah tunnel, and do something about it. And if they don't do anything about it, Israel was at that stage not in a position to do it itself. And without the support of Israel's friends and without the UN being able to do anything, things developed as they developed until the you know, there's an expression in Hebrew, the straw that broke the camel's back. And this is what happened. And Israel came to the conclusion, look, we can't suffer this anymore. We've got thousands of residents of our northern kibbutzim and villages being away from home for over a year. This is a situation that no normal government would permit. So did what they did.
So then let me go to my question, really, which draws on the conversations, discussions you've had since the opening about listing all the things that are either that Hamas or Palestinians or others effectively present to the world, whether you argue that, you know, it's falsehoods or it's manipulation of information, and tie that in to some actions that the Israeli government has been taking, which we previously discussed, the recent legislation on UNRWA, or earlier the announcement that the UN Secretary General would not be welcome in Israel, and other things. There has been, it seems to me, not only over time of a buildup of a very negative view, both in Israel and I expect in much of the Jewish diaspora towards the UN. And putting that just in the background, the big question I have is what I would assert is the profound failure of Israeli public diplomacy. Presuming, and I do, that everything you've said can be substantiated, it's not out there. There is not that kind of messaging that is clearly presented, even in the most difficult times when it's perhaps most important. If you can honestly argue that the issue of the humanitarian crisis in Israel is not the fault of Israel in terms of blocking the distribution or the access of food and water and medical supplies, and we can go through all the different issues, then why is that not effectively presented so that the observant public, whether it's through the conventional media outlets or social media, are much more clearly aware of the kinds of arguments that Israel, if it can empirically verify these arguments, can and should be making? Because otherwise, the messaging is very different now. From the first 6 weeks after October 7th, the messaging was clear.
Okay, David.
When the casualties got to 2,000 or 3,000, the messaging started to slip. And from then on, it hasn't been.
If you look at the history of all the various wars and battles between Israel and Hamas and Israel and Hezbollah and Israel and its other neighbors over the years, you'll see that for the first 2 or 3 days, the international community has been behind Israel's right to defend itself and do whatever needs to be done. As soon as casualty figures appeared, so you got accusations by the foreign minister of the British foreign minister that Israel is using excessive force, or you know, if more Israelis would have been killed, or if an equal number of Israelis would have been killed than Palestinians, then that would have been fine. But because it was disproportionate, Israel was always blamed. And what you're basically saying is public diplomacy, which in Hebrew is called hasbara, which is a useless term, and a term that can't be applicable for Israel, because there can be no such thing as hasbara or public diplomacy, because whatever Israel will say and whatever Israel will publish and whatever Israel will do will always be the butt of some type of negative criticism. And the information is there. Let me point you to the website of the Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs as one example. If you go in there, the jcpa.org, you'll see that I edited a 2-volume book called Israel Under Fire, which discusses the various legal aspects of the war, the economic aspects, the psychological aspects, the UN aspects, with brilliant articles by Professor Anbayevsky and various others about various aspects of how the position that Israel has been faced. You know, the information is there, the explanations are there, but you know, it's very comfortable for the international community for all sorts of reasons, and we all know the basic reason, to look at Israel in a negative light. It always has been that way. Since I was a young officer in the Israeli Military Advocate General Corps, when I used to have to deal with the Red Cross and deal with the UN, and deal with everybody, up to working for the Foreign Ministry, up to being ambassador in Canada, and the work that I'm doing now, it's always been the same. Israel isn't like New Zealand. New Zealand doesn't need hasbara. It doesn't need to explain itself. The Dutch don't need to explain themselves. You know what? Even the Russians, the Russian ambassador used to tell me in Ottawa, why are you going to the Globe and Mail, and why are you being interviewed, and why are you writing articles? Do like me, go fishing. Don't bother. Let them all criticize. It was important for us to be able to explain ourselves, because we're not in the same position as the Russians or any of these other states. But that's the situation. So as good as reasons that we might well have, and explanations that we have, and justifications that we have, according to international humanitarian law, and as whatever we say won't be accepted. We can try, and we do try, and the poor ambassadors who are on the front line, on the diplomatic front line, have to work very hard and have a very difficult job to do this vis-a-vis the various governments. But that's the situation as it is. So there's no such thing as public diplomacy in this field. It's not hasbara. It's giving excuses, basically. And if you can give a good excuse and someone will believe you, that's fine. But in most cases, they won't believe you, despite the fact that you can prove what you're saying. And the best example of this is the UN Secretary General and the prosecutor of the International Criminal Court. So, you know, I'm sorry, you know, it's a negative point of view, but in my view, being very practical, it's I faced this throughout my career. When I used to sit in the UN Sixth Committee, the legal committee, and Israel's best friends would walk past my seat and not look at me because they didn't want to be seen chatting with the Israeli. Now, this is, I'm talking about 30, 40 years ago. and nothing has changed. It doesn't matter what we do or what we don't do. For 3 days, we'll get a lot of sympathy when we're being mutilated and killed, or when we're facing attacks. After that, as soon as statistics come out, and as soon as the other side organizes itself into manipulating propaganda, we'll get the criticism, and the criticism is aimed at getting sympathy from the Western world.
Thank you, Alan. We have a couple of questions that have come in as well, so I think I'll ask you these questions from the participants, and then we'll come back to the panel members. One of our members at Holy Blossom Freedom Moscovich asks, makes a statement on Yom Kippur, a Canadian ambassador to the United Nations, Bob Ray, who I think you probably know, spoke at Holy Blossom during the afternoon. He spoke during the afternoon study sessions, and he refuted UNRWA's continuing staff relationship and their corrupt and unconscionable relationship with Hamas. He said that the individuals that had been identified were fired, and that he sat or chaired the review committee that came to that conclusion. The question that Frida asks, if I can try to articulate this, is how can we deal with this wide acceptance by the UN and other officials who seem to accept that as the sort of conclusion of the issue?
Well, look, the UN has got an interest in minimizing what was a scandalous situation, so that they can continue to function and get financing. They have a basically important job. If they were to do their job in a sincere and genuine way, and if they're duly supervised and whoever's financing them is persuaded that the monies that are going in are used for genuine purposes. But the UN has got an interest in minimizing this criticism. It's devastating criticism for a UN organization that bases itself on contributions. So I can understand that. But as I said, I don't think anything is going to happen with UNRWA. I don't think UNRWA will be harmed. UNRWA will continue to function. We just have to make sure that it functions in a way in which it won't be abused again. That's all. But the head of UNRWA annoys me very much in his constant wailing that the humanitarian functions of UNRWA are being harmed by Israel. He's completely ignoring the fact that he himself was involved in a lot of this behind the scenes Hamas functioning. And you need only read in the book that I referred to that's on our website. There's 2 articles. There's one article by Anne Baevsky on the UN, and another article by a former stagiaire of mine, Raphael Ben-Ari, who analyzed UNRWA and analyzed the way UNRWA works, and it points out very, very well the way in which the head of UNRWA was involved in all this. But they have an interest in minimizing it. So okay, that's a fact of life. It's a UN organ. Little Israel hasn't got much to do against 192 other countries in the UN that don't necessarily agree with it. Even a lot of Israel's best friends.
Thank you. Well, we have 2 more questions. And this probably relates to the discussion you were having with David DeWitt about in terms of Israel's public diplomacy. A question from one of our attendees: why does Israel not do more to counter false information regarding the humanitarian food? The actual question is, would it not be better to let journalists in to see what is actually happening? And I guess the premise of the question is having Western journalists into Gaza who might be able to report more objectively as to what's going on.
They may be right. First of all, I'm not sure that I would, as a journalist, I would like to go into Gaza and endanger myself. But look, the facts speak for themselves. There's footage. Israel doesn't invent the footage of Hamas operatives attacking drivers and stealing the supplies. This is happening. Israel is all sorts of ideas have been put forward that maybe Israel should organize it, or Israel should engage neutral company to come and do this. Everybody is afraid, so it's still an ongoing problem. As far as I know, journalists are allowed in and do cover these things, but I don't know the day-to-day intricate nitty-gritty details of what's happening. But the information is there. It's I've seen it. I've seen it on the television, the way that they're taking trucks and getting rid of all the supplies. So I don't understand why people aren't prepared to accept this and place it in doubt, as if Israel is trying to deceive the international community. Israel's got no interest in deceiving the international community.
Thank you. John, you have a
Yeah.
comment?
Look, my understanding of it is that nobody disputes the fact that there are gangs and Hamas taking some of the supplies that are coming in. The point that the ICC prosecutor and others have made is that if Israel is conducting a war in a certain place and still understands that it has an obligation for humanitarian assistance, food, medical supplies, water, etc., to get in, then it's up to Israel to ensure, by providing security for that aid to get in. It's quite clear that there's no rule of law in Gaza right now. That's pretty obvious. So if you're going to get aid to these people, and it is an obligation and a moral obligation and a legal obligation for Israel to ensure that that aid gets to these people, then Israel has to provide the security, because nobody else can. Israel is involved in a major operation there. Nobody else is going to get the food in, or the water, or the medicine. So that's I'm just saying that's the argument, that it's up to Israel to do it.
But Israel's not just sitting around not doing anything. Israel's making every effort to ensure that these supplies get in, and if it means having firefights with these Hamas people, then this happens. Regrettably, Israel is often accused of harming drivers and one thing and another. In doing so, in trying to ensure that these supplies get in, there have been some groups in Israel who've tried to prevent these trucks from going in, and Israeli forces and police have dealt with these people, and a lot of them have been put on trial. Look, Israel doesn't deny its responsibilities. I personally think that the accentuation being placed on humanitarian supplies is far exaggerated, far more exaggerated than it warrants. I think everything is being done to ensure that humanitarian supplies are getting in. Polio vaccines for 200% of those in need were brought into the Gaza Strip for the local population. There are the authorities within the Israeli military who are involved in or responsible for this. It happens that it's very difficult to prevent these gangs from functioning, because Israel can't be everywhere, and Israel can't. Israel doesn't want to occupy the whole of the Gaza Strip. And this is another point. No Israeli that I know of, except for a few crazy idiots, has got any hope or intention of Israel re-establishing a military government in the Gaza Strip and ensuring full military control. It just won't happen. And so all these discussions about the day after, who's going to be responsible whether it's going to be some type of joint international agency or tribal leaders or whatever, these things are still being considered. But Israel has got no will to take over the whole of Gaza. Doesn't want it, can't afford it. We don't need it.
Thank you. Dylan, did you have a question? And then we have another question that came in, but I'll go to that. I'll go to Dylan first.
Well, why don't you go to the other one, because mine is like way off track of this, so I'll save it. That's why I took my hand down for a second.
Oh, I see. Okay, well, the other question that came in actually has to do with back to the Lebanon situation, Alan. And the question from Hirsch Glickman, will moving Hezbollah north of the Litani River be effective given that Hezbollah has missiles which can still reach Israel?
Well, this is the $64,000 question. According to this agreement that seems to be materializing, it's very clear that Lebanon is taking the responsibility, presumably backed by France or the United States and other countries, to prevent any of these weapons, rockets, being fired against Israel. And according to this agreement, Israel has got every right to defend itself, if need be, if it comes to a situation where it's faced with a military threat from these long-range rockets. Israel will have the prerogative of responding, of defending itself. So look, Hezbollah is not going to disappear because it's also a political movement. The aim is to somehow try and get it to give up its weaponry or to place its weaponry under some type of supervision, not just by the Lebanese government, which is very weak, hardly existent, but now hopes to be strengthened in view of the fact that Hezbollah is no longer as strong as it was, with the assistance of countries friendly to Lebanon, principally France, which considers itself to be, in a superior position of influence with respect to Lebanon. It always was. Hopefully that they will prevent such weaponry. First of all, prevent such weaponry from being used against Israel. But secondly, do whatever needs to be done to make sure that such weaponry is dismantled or removed or whatever, and let Hezbollah function as a political party, do whatever it wants as a Shiite political party in the jigsaw puzzle that is Lebanon, as long as it doesn't endanger Lebanon's territorial integrity and political independence by threatening Israel and inviting Israeli response.
Thank you. Dylan, did you want me to go to you, or should I go to you? Want to try, and then I'll go to David?
Sure. Look, mine is a little more, taking a step back and commenting something that I think about sometimes. I remember in 2005, I was a graduate student writing a paper in support of the disengagement from Gaza. I think lots of folks in the center, obviously on the left, but also in the center, were quite supportive of it. And now, in retrospect, it looks, at least more difficult to justify. The things that those on the right said would happen have happened, and then some. And the same with the withdrawal from Lebanon in 2000. And so I guess just a reflection on how Israel deals with that, emerging reality where it's quite difficult to withdraw from territory. It's quite difficult to trust security guarantees. I mean, they have a Security Council resolution in Lebanon that is just not implemented and not acted on by the UN force there. So how Israel does that, and I guess your own reflections on, I don't know which side of the coin you were on in 2005, but on what's happened in Gaza since.
Look, unfortunately, ironclad guarantees proven to be unreliable, stemming from the United Nations emergency force that ran away in 1967 when Nasser threatened to invade Israel. UN guarantees are proven to be unreliable. So what Israel is trying to do in these negotiations is to ensure that it has an involvement. In other words, if guarantees don't help, or if they're not reliable, or if the forces who are meant to strengthen these guarantees or realize these guarantees don't fulfill their responsibilities, then Israel has to maintain an option, a prerogative, to do whatever it needs to be done by itself. And this is what appears to be in this draft agreement with respect to southern Lebanon. Israel is maintaining, it's insisting on maintaining the prerogative of doing what needs to be done. By the way, I remember when we were negotiating with the PLO on the interim agreement, the Oslo Accords. I remember having a long meeting with somebody called Jibril Rajoub, who's now the Palestinian representative for FIFA in FIFA, the football association, and he said, "Well, look, why are you insisting on having a provision in the agreement that says that in the event that the Palestinians don't fulfill their promises to prevent terrorism, Israel reserves for itself the right to come in and do what needs to be done? You'll do it in any event. So why write it? Because if you write it, then Arafat won't like it and he won't agree with it. We know that you'll do it in any event. So why write it?" And maybe we were naive and maybe we didn't write it. And what happened. So I don't think now Israel will be as naive as we were then. And I think we'll retain for ourselves the prerogative to defend ourselves if need be. Whether this will be effective or not, time will tell. Everybody's talking about 5-year chains of wars and conflicts. Hopefully, the aim is that after this war, whilst I'm not sure that we'll ever get to a situation of peace, at least we'll get to a long-term period where there won't be any more conflict, or there'll always be terrorism here and there, but not organized terrorist organizations firing rockets. This, of course, doesn't mean that the Iranians aren't going to continue raining down on us all sorts of interballistic continental missiles, but this is another issue.
Thank you, Alan. David, before I go to you, John has to leave in a few moments, so I just wanted to see if John had any final comments or questions. Okay,
Thanks,
John,
so
when you
much,
do
Alan.
leave, I want to thank you for being with us and knowing that you have to leave a little early. Thank you. David?
Sure, thank you. In an earlier answer, you said, Alan, Hezbollah is not going to disappear. It is a political movement. And I think you're right. And it exists within not yet a failed state, but close to a failed state that may have now an opportunity over time to reconstruct and rebuild, especially as Syria is weakened. But what about Hamas? What's the issue from your perspective? Because so much of what we heard from the Israeli government was that Israel is fighting this war until Hamas is destroyed, Hamas is eliminated. But we all know that Hamas is a political movement based on a very focused ideology, the eradication of Israel. And you can destroy or weaken the Hamas militia, the Hamas military capability, but both with those who are already part of the Hamas militia and the new generation that is probably being formed in the wake of the conflicts that they're growing up in. What is the threshold for Israel to say, we can live with this Hamas. We don't like it. It's a political movement. It's present. It's now not just present in Gaza, but it's growing stronger by the day in the West Bank. It may be growing stronger in Jordan, which itself is a huge issue. But we can move on. And now we can transition into the opportunities of diplomacy, of getting those hostages back, and the notion of reconstruction, the future. I mean, where is the line on Hamas as a political movement from an Israeli
Look,
perspective?
you only need to read the Hamas Charter.
I've read it.
Yeah, it's interesting reading. You know, the whole purpose of existence is to get rid of any non-Islamic presence in the area, whether it's Christian, Jew, or whatever. We're all infidels. I remember having a very interesting discussion when I was ambassador in Canada. I think there was a member of parliament who was Pakistani origin. I've forgotten his name. Very nice fellow. And several others who said, well, why? Good God, why can't you people just negotiate with Hamas? You know, you've negotiated with Fatah, you've negotiated with the PLO. Why can't you just negotiate with Hamas? And I tried to explain, I said, look, you can't negotiate with Muhammad. The precepts of Hamas won't enable them to compromise with a Jewish state. It just doesn't, it's not compatible with their entire being. And therefore, there's nothing to negotiate. And they're up front. They're not like the PLO, who might talk with a very reasonable, in very reasonable terms. But basically, the PLO charter also is very similar to the Hamas charter with respect to the fact that Israel shouldn't exist. But at least Hamas says it. He says it openly. So we know who we're dealing with. So the question is whether we can live with them and limit their capabilities and just be aware of the fact that we have to be careful. And I think despite many statements by Israeli leaders that we're going to destroy Hamas completely on one thing or another, being realistic, I think that as long as we're in a situation where we're preventing the wherewithal to carry out their philosophy and preventing their weapons production capabilities, preventing the importation of weapons, preventing any way in which they can harm Israel, then you're just going to have to live with them. We'll never come to a peace treaty with Hamas unless Hamas changes its basic philosophy, which is highly unlikely because it basically conflicts with their very foundational thinking. So the only, and I remember once giving a lecture at the Naval War College in New Haven, immediately after one of the conflagrations, and that was the position that I gave. I said, look, it was the Jenin situation. I said, look, we can't delete a philosophy. What we can do is prevent it from being able to be realized by preventing its use of weaponry. And that's as much as we can achieve, in my opinion, being very practical.
But that's not the position that has been articulated by the Netanyahu government in terms of where is the threshold that negotiations can move forward, diplomacy can take a hold, you can address hostages, you can start considering what are the next steps. So the Netanyahu government has said over and over again, our goal is to eliminate Hamas. And the nuances that you've brought into the conversation, which are entirely reasonable and I think factual, and from my perspective, probably correct, I don't hear from the Netanyahu government.
First of all, the Netanyahu government, despite the fact that it contains crazy elements, It doesn't necessarily mean that ultimately, when we come down to serious negotiation, Netanyahu won't have the majority in his government to make the various compromises necessary. And I think there are several factors that are involved. The fact that Hamas has an interest in ruling in Gaza. They want to continue ruling. They want to continue ruling in a territory that is rebuilt, that is functioning, that's economically viable. And they know that in order to do so, they can't play around with firing missiles at Israel, because everything will be destroyed again. So they've got an incentive if they want to rule, and if they want to take over the Palestinian administration, the PLO, Fatah, and everything else, and this is their aim. Once, if and whenever the Palestinians decide to have elections, which is highly unlikely, and they haven't had for the last 20 or so years, they want to take over. And in order to take over, they have to have a viable proposition as to how to conduct themselves as a viable government. And part of being a viable government, according to international law, means that you have to fulfill commitments, you have to fulfill international requirements, and you have to be a peace-loving entity. This is all written in the Charter, in the UN Charter. And that can be the only assumption. And then, so I know Netanyahu. I've been his legal advisor when he was the foreign minister. We went jogging together when he was ambassador to the UN. I was working for the UN, and we were very close and very friendly. And our wives used to cook together, with at least my wife and his previous wife. I know that he's a very shrewd and prudent man. He's got a problem with a coalition that he doesn't like, that he has to live with. But ultimately, when it comes to when the chips are down, I think he'll come to the compromise that is necessary. I'm no great lover, not of Netanyahu or of any of the Israeli politicians. I dislike Israeli politicians. I refuse to attend meetings in the Knesset because I don't like them, especially when in the middle of a meeting they stood up and started davening mincha while in the middle of some explanation I was given. So I decided I'm not going to go there anymore. I'm disillusioned with Israeli politicians, but I think ultimately a responsible Israeli leadership will make the necessary compromises in order to enable the Israeli population to live in peace. But I'm maybe overly optimistic.
Thank you, Alan. I have one question, and then see if anybody else has other questions. But before I do that, one of our participants provided a little bit of information on war correspondents and their work in war and conflict zones. And I just read what she'd like me to share with you. And she talks about a Dr. Anthony Feinstein from Sunnybrook Hospital, who's a psychiatrist at Sunnybrook here in Toronto, but has an avocation, a hobby of covering the work of war photographers, and he's a project that he calls Shooting War, and he publishes quite a bit in the Globe and Mail. And his hobby is the work of war photographers, and he's one of the leading experts on this subject internationally. And the point simply to be added to the conversation is that these war journalists and war photographers go into war zones to try to officially record and inform the world about what the reality is in a particular war conflict. And that might be of interest to our participants in sort of looking at the work of Dr. Feinstein and looking him up in the Globe and Mail. So with that, I wanted to ask you about Qatar and its involvement in all of what's going on. There seems to me to be some kind of dynamic going on here where Qatar is involved in and hosts in Doha negotiations for the release of hostages. And at the same time, we know that Qatar is also allowing many of the Hamas leadership to actually live and survive and live what appear to be comfortable lives in Doha. Can you comment on this kind of seeming contradiction or?
Sure, it's completely and utterly unrealistic. Qatar is violating international UN conventions on giving shelter to terrorist leaders, financing terrorism. You know, there are several UN conventions that I was involved in drafting, negotiating. That Qatar itself is in stark violation of them. On the other hand, Qatar is hosting one of the largest U.S. Air Force bases in the Middle East, and Qatar, from the financial point of view, is financing all sorts of academic institutions in the U.S. and all over the world. As presume in Canada also, and everybody's treating Qatar with kid gloves because it is in a position that it is able to perhaps influence the Hamas leadership on the one hand, and is able to speak with the Egyptians and is able to speak with the CIA and others, and therefore people close a blind eye to the fact that it hosts Al Jazeera, and Al Jazeera is a major source of incitement to terrorism and violence, and it's hosting the leaders of Hamas. It's basically a picture of the unrealistic situation of international politics. It's all based on interests, and the element of justice and of logic is maintained under the surface, and at the expense of political, military, and other interests. That's all that can be said. I would hope that at some we've always hoped that at some stage Qatar would tell the Hamas leadership, get up and leave if you don't come to an agreement. Maybe that they will still do that, but this has been something that Israel has been urging the Americans and others to push with respect to Qatar. Whether anything will come of it or not, we don't know. But this is an irregular situation that exists, and as long as there are hostages, we have to cope and live with this type of irregular situation. Once there are no hostages, then the situation might be different, and the Hamas knows this. That's why they're holding on to the hostages.
Thank you. This brings us to the end of our webinar today, and I want to close by thanking you, Alan, once again for being with us and for spending time with us, and for your analysis and insights into what's happening and your reflections on what may go on in the future. And with the hope that we can ask you to join us again at some future point as we continue these discussions with our panel and with the people who join us. So with
Mark,
that,
is there a recording of this?
yes, this is being, I believe it's being, is it being recorded? Because I don't see the recording on today.
There.
I
Sorry?
think there's a recording, there's a red light here, so I think it's been.
Oh yeah, it is being recorded, yes. It's
If
being
so,
recorded.
if it's possible to receive.
Yes, we'll send you the link. It will be uploaded to the Holy Blossom Israel Dialogues website in the next few days, and once as soon as it's uploaded, we'll send you an email with the link.
Thank you very much.
Very much. So thank you very much. Les, did you want to have any final words in terms of thanks?
On behalf of Holy Blossom,
You're-
Alan, thank you so much for coming, giving your knowledge. It really is a pleasure to hear from you, and we certainly learned a lot this morning. Different points of view that we don't always read in the press. I also want to thank our panelists, John, Dylan, David, and Mark for chairing. On behalf of Israel Dialogues, we're off to a good start. We've got another one next week. Dr. Limor Yehuda, who is someone I think a new guest for us, and we'll be sending out some of the things that she has written with the announcements, so you can get a better understanding of what she wants to do. And I just want to mention one other thing. and that's Deborah Lyons, who is the Canadian Special Envoy combating anti-Semitism. She will be at Holy Blossom on Wednesday, November 13th. It will be online as well, but hopefully you'll be interested in coming out. Other than that, again, thank you very much, and everybody have a good day. Go dress up for Halloween.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Alan. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. You're welcome.